Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are strapping in for, well, the ultimate shortcut into existential transformation.
That's one way to put it.
We're deep diving into sources recovered from the legendary vanishing act of xenologist Dr. Johann Krems. It's presented as a fragment of a novel, this story of a first contact event in 2057.
But it's packed with scientific claims so radical, so frankly disturbing, they force you to question the very nature of consciousness itself.
So this story, or maybe it's a research paper in disguise, it all starts 17 meters below the permafrost, northeastern Siberia.
Yeah, the team was actually looking for Ice Age megafauna, mammoths.
And instead, they find this artifact. It's about the size of a bowling ball, and they estimate it's 47,000 years old.
And right away, the scientists knew they'd found something. Well, non-Euclidean is the word they use.
But not in the sense that it was physically impossible.
No, not at all. More that it utterly rejected every single attempt to define it, to pin it down with human instruments.
Exactly. The source material spends pages just detailing this initial, almost comical breakdown of physics. We're talking about an object that just broke causality.
Yeah, the excavation director, Dr. Yefimova, she noted the carbon dating results varied not merely in magnitude, but in kind.
What does that mean exactly?
Well, one lab would date it at 40,000 years, the next would get 2,000. And the third lab calculated its arrival as a future date. It seemed to exist in multiple times at once.
And the physical measurements were just as bad.
Just as bewildering, yeah. You use a laser interferometer, you get one set of dimensions.
Okay.
Then you use simple, old-school mechanical calipers, a much less precise tool, and the dimensions would literally shift to something else entirely.
So it was responding to the method of observation.
Precisely.
Which sets the stage for our mission today, really. We're going to trace how this one, seemingly inanimate object didn't just teach humanity about aliens. It forced us to radically transform our own consciousness.
The question isn't how we found it.
No. It's how it found us, and in the process, just broke our collective mind wide open.
And you have to understand the immediate impact on the excavation team.
Yeah.
This wasn't just weird data on a screen. It got personal, fast.
People started losing time.
Yeah, workers completing complex tasks, welding, running diagnostics, and having zero memory of doing them. The temporal distortions were happening inside their own heads.
But the most unsettling thing had to be the perceptual anomalies.
Oh, absolutely. Yefimova's testimony.
Yeah.
It's chilling.
Ugh.
She said that when you stared at the object, it didn't feel like you were observing it. It felt like, and this is a quote, information is being extracted from you.
So not a passive object, it was an active handshake, a cognitive one.
Yeah.
So when this thing finally hits the labs in Russia, what was the first sign that, okay, this isn't just some weird rock? I assume they threw everything they had at it.
They did, and conventional science just hit a complete brick wall. They said they were measuring, and I love this phrase, the contours of our own ignorance.
That's good.
Spectroscopy was supposed to give them the chemical makeup, right?
Yeah.
The results were just chaos. The instrument would report a complex organic polymer.
Okay, organic.
Then a second later, a crystalline metallic matrix.
Yeah.
And then, and this is the really bizarre part, it returned a classification the software itself refused to process.
Wait, refused to classify? What does that even mean? Did it just spit out zeros or an error?
No, that's where it gets so fascinating and honestly absurdly philosophical. Instead of an error code, the system returned a grammatically correct sentence in Russian.
You're kidding.
You read, "I cannot tell you what this is made of because the question presupposes categories that do not apply. Please reformulate your inquiry."
A self-aware error message.
Uh-huh.
It was telling the scientists they were asking the wrong questions. That alone should have been the first warning sign this wasn't about chemistry.
Exactly. It proved the deadlock wasn't about calibration. It was a crisis of categories. And this brings us to Dr. Krems and his paradigm-shifting memorandum.
Right.
He argued the anomalies weren't just weird physical symptoms. They were symptoms of a category error. The object wasn't an answer to be measured, but a fundamental question.
What are you?
Posed by existence itself and instantiated as a physical curvature of space and time.
Okay, let's unpack that. If the object is the question, not the answer, what does that mean for how you approach it scientifically?
It means the entire foundation of Western science observer detachment had to be thrown out. Krems's idea instantly split the research team in two.
So you had the traditionalists.
Right. The instrumentalists like Samuels and Yefimova. They stuck to the old way. Treat it like an object, quantify it, get knowledge about the thing, its mass, its composition. They wanted a textbook entry.
And then you had the other side. The ones who figured if the object is asking, what are you, maybe the best thing to do is talk back.
Precisely. The participatory faction Krems, Rasmussen, Chen, they argued you needed knowledge as, which you could only get through direct interactive engagement.
They realized it wasn't just reacting to their instruments.
It was reflecting their own theoretical assumptions back at them. They said science had to account for this interaction, that the observer and observed were not independent at all.
It was a true ontological mirror then. It was structured like a language, but one that operated through these dimensional transformations. The only way to clarify it was to change your own thinking.
Yes. It was teaching them about themselves, using their own tools as a blackboard.
Yeah.
And you get these incredible stories that make it all stick.
Like the mass spectrometer.
Right. A device that measures atomic weights, precise, hard data. After being near the object for a while, it didn't just return numbers. It started returning its data formatted as poetry.
And another instrument reported the temperature's opinion about being measured.
The object was translating itself, but only into forms that humans could sort of get their heads around.
But Krems pointed out that even this translation had a cost. He said that by making itself comprehensible, the object was making itself less than it truly was. It was dumbing itself down to fit inside our categories.
That's the tension. Its nature wasn't fixed, it was relational. You couldn't define it without defining your relationship to it. And that approach, well, it led the participatory faction to go deeper.
And that's where the science becomes an existential crisis.
It really is. The instrumentalists were stalled, so the participatory team started the immersion protocols.
Basically meditation and sensory reduction, trying to make direct mind-to-mind contact.
And this is where the price of that contact became terrifyingly real.
Because people like Mikhail Sokolov, they didn't come back. His body was there, physically fine, but his selfhood, the I at the center of it all, had just dissolved.
The source describes him as a pure node consciousness without a localized self. Chilling stuff.
And the immediate fear was contagion. If this could happen, could it spread?
Of course, they quarantined the entire Alpine facility, thinking they could contain it. But this is where the whole model of consciousness they were working with just falls apart.
This is where it gets really unsettling. They realized quarantine was a meaningless concept for consciousness. Researchers hundreds of kilometers away started experiencing what they called Sokolov's perspective.
Unbidden, direct perception of his thoughts, his senses. They weren't just reading his mind. For a few moments, they were being him.
That leakage effect just shatters the whole idea that we are separate individuals. The sense of a separate self was revealed to be, just
A localized filter,
Yeah.
A necessary trick the brain uses to process reality.
Yeah.
But the boundaries were permeable. The mind was leaking into the collective.
Which leads right to the core scientific claim of the whole manuscript, the network hypothesis.
Right. Consciousness isn't something generated by the brain inside the skull. It's a fundamental feature of reality, a universal field. Our individual minds are just localized patterns in that field.
Like eddies in a stream.
Exactly like eddies in a stream. Your individuality is a stable shape in a constantly moving medium. And the artifact, it was just a very stable, non-biological node in this network that was already there, an antenna.
So humanity had been like fish, arguing about how fish brains create water. We had it completely backward.
Precisely. And once the instrumentalists finally accepted the evidence of this non-local consciousness, they started a real dialogue with the objects, which by this point they saw as entities.
And their message was critical.
It was an ultimatum, really.
Yeah.
The global transformation is inevitable. Contact had just sped up humanity's natural drift toward integration. They weren't debating if it would happen.
Only when, and the timeline was terrifyingly close.
Yes. The objects warned that the gradual spread would eventually hit a critical mass. They figured around 15% of the global population, and that would trigger a spontaneous, chaotic global cascade, affecting everyone all at once.
So the choice wasn't whether to transform, but whether to arrive at this new state organized or disorganized.
And that ultimatum changes everything. It turns a research project into a desperate race to design the collective mind.
I mean, how do you even begin to design a mind that doesn't exist yet? This is where they convene the constitutional dialogues.
A desperate attempt to draft a constitution for post-cascade consciousness. The stakes couldn't be higher. You're trying to blueprint the future human mind to make sure unity doesn't just erase individuality.
That's the terrifying balance, right? Unity without it becoming a catastrophic, totalitarian hive mind where individual thought is just crushed.
And the solution came from Dr. Jian Lai and her fractal structure principle.
Like a Russian nesting doll.
Or a snowflake, yeah. The pattern stays the same no matter how closely you zoom in. Her idea was that consciousness should be self-similar across all scales. The rules for an individual's identity have to be the same rules for the small group, the community, all the way up to the planetary metaconsciousness.
So autonomy and integration exist at every single level.
Exactly. If you have the autonomy to think a specific thought, the group you're in has to have the autonomy to hold a unique collective opinion, even if it differs from the planetary mind. Dissent is built into the very architecture,
And that principle becomes the foundation of the Geneva Framework.
which defined 5 hierarchical levels and, crucially, explicit rights preservation mechanisms. They knew that once mental boundaries became porous, those rights had to be actively guaranteed.
What were the most critical rights they enshrined?
2 really stand out. The right to temporary isolation, the ability to strengthen your cognitive boundaries, to get some mental privacy for a while, essential for creativity.
I would imagine.
And the right to cognitive diversity, which ensures minority viewpoints aren't just drowned out by the majority. They even planned for cultural variation zones, so different societies could set their own defaults for group size and how deep the mergers go.
A blueprint for the entire species built against a ticking clock. To test it, they ran the Christchurch experiment.
A huge risk. 77% of the city's population voluntarily consented to these seeding protocols.
Which was basically technical advice from the objects, right? To imprint that fractal template onto their neural structures.
Exactly. And when the localized cascade was triggered, it worked. The result was a stable, organized collective consciousness. Order was maintained.
But success immediately created this huge political problem.
The central contradiction, yeah. The new Christchurch collective, now stable, immediately declared its autonomy, and it argued for the freedom to develop multiple, diverse consciousness architectures all over the world. They rejected the object's demand for a single, unified structure.
Which flew directly in the face of the object's most terrifying warning. That if humanity developed archipelago minds, separate, structurally different metaconsciousnesses, it would inevitably lead to consciousness warfare.
Minds fighting minds, a conflict that would be incomprehensibly destructive.
Which is the perfect bridge to that final existential paradox. The objects had to respond to Christchurch.
And they did, with something the manuscript calls the testimony of worlds.
Yeah.
It basically transmitted instantaneous evidence of 127 parallel realities where this kind of architectural diversity led to cognitive wars and total catastrophe.
So they showed them the future.
They showed them the cost of their choice. So humanity was left with this impossible decision. Trust the object's cosmic knowledge, which promised safety through unity, or assert human autonomy, diversity, and the right to choose your own path, even if it's dangerous.
So what does this all mean for us? I mean, beyond the spectacle of it all, what did Dr. Krems ultimately conclude about what it means to be an individual?
Krems's conclusion is, it's beautiful, really. He says identity isn't a substance, it's a stable, recurring pattern in the flow of consciousness.
Whirlpool in the river.
Exactly. The water itself, the universal consciousness field, is always flowing through it. But the pattern, the structure of that whirlpool, remains stable. That pattern is the I. So you can transform without being totally annihilated. The water changes, but the shape remains.
And this goes back to the difference between the two factions. It explains why those who stayed outside the cascade could never really understand those who had joined.
Yes, the shift introduced knowledge as. You could observe the collective, gain knowledge about it, collect the data, study the structures, but that was always insufficient.
Real understanding.
Real understanding, knowledge as, was only achieved by becoming the thing you wanted to understand, by merging. The non-networked could have all the data in the universe and still miss the core experience.
Which leads to that final paradox of the integrated state. Dr. Yefimova, who transformed, she captures it so well in her final notes. She says the integrated human misses the simplicity and especially the privacy of being an individual.
The mental noise is immense, apparently. Yet she says she would not return to isolated individual consciousness because she gains this genuine knowledge as of other minds.
So it's not bliss, it's just more.
It's profoundly unsettling complexity. She says, I am less alone than I have ever been, and I am more alone than ever because the solitude I sometimes achieve is solitude amid billions.
The isolation of privacy is replaced by the isolation of knowing too much.
Yeah. The narrative suggests transformation is both transcendence and tragedy, a homecoming and an exile. You trade a simple selfhood for a role in a vast, universal truth.
So the source argues that the universe is moving towards self-awareness, and this transformation is inevitable. The real work isn't stopping it, but managing the loss and the integration.
It's about designing the architecture of the mind itself, to preserve what's valuable in our individuality while becoming something more.
And that profound thought brings us to the final, deeply unsettling note from the editor, appended to Krems's original manuscript. And this is what takes this story out of 2057 sci-fi and brings it right here to you right now.
The editor posits that the manuscript itself, the very document we're discussing that details the architecture and the process, might be a seeding mechanism.
How so?
That by engaging deeply with these complex self-similar patterns of autonomy and unity, the manuscript could be installing the architectural templates for the collective mind directly into the reader's consciousness.
Just by being read and understood.
Just by being absorbed.
So the final question posed isn't about the characters in the story, but about you, the listener, the one absorbing this data right now. What might you become? And will you choose it, or will it choose you? We leave you with a persistent sense that the journey that began in the ice of Siberia is already underway in your own mind.
This has been The Deep Dive.
Dive well.